إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So in the previous lesson we looked at the two sects, the sect of the Jabariyah and the sect of the Qadariyah. And both of these groups deviated on the issue of Al-Qadar. One of them negated the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of the actions of man. Allah creates, Allah decrees, Allah knows with His perfect knowledge, and Allah wrote the actions of men, He wills them and He creates them. And so here Allah is the creator of the actions. And so the Mu'tazila or the Qadariyah, as they are otherwise known, they denied this. And they claim that man creates his own actions outside of the power, the control and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason, as we said, was that they made an analogy, they made a qiyas for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based upon what they see in the creation. And they said, now how can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will and create the actions of men and then reward or punish them for it? And so we looked at this doubt in the previous lessons and said that this is a false analogy to make, and you can't make qiyas, you can't make analogies between the actions of Allah on the basis of what you see of the actions of men. And then on the other hand we said that there are the Jabariyah, and the Jabariyah, they basically said that man does not have his own actions, rather all actions are by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you ascribe any independent actions to Allah, any independent power or ability to man, if you ascribe independent power or ability and actions to man, then this means that you have committed shirk, because Allah is the only actor, meaning He is the only one who acts. All acts are done by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in this respect we said that we distinguish between Allah's act of creating the actions of men and the men performing their actions. Right? So humans perform their own actions. A man is a fa'il and Allah is the khaliq, He is the creator. And so in this respect the Jabariyah are wrong, they are mistaken, because they try to, they basically claim that man is compelled and forced to do what he does. He has absolutely no true independent choice. So in each of these two groups we said that there were two groups amongst them. Amongst the Qadariyah, the extreme ones who deny Allah's prior knowledge, and then the mainstream Qadariyah, the Mu'tazila, who basically say Allah does not create the actions of men. And likewise the Jabariyah, the extremist Jabariyah, who are Jahm bin Safwan and the Jahmiyah, and then those who actually try to disguise their view, which is really the same as the view of the Jabariyah, which is the view of the Ash'aris and Maturidis. And we should look at that in a bit more detail in some of the future lessons.
Who are the ones who use the term al-kasb?
Yeah, that's the Ash'aris and Maturidis, al-kasb. And we should look at that in a bit more detail, inshallah, in some of the future lessons. So, from that discussion, we basically summarized what is the view and the position of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. We said that we hold that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He creates the actions of the servant, and that the action is the one who does, the action is done by the servant. The action is performed by the servant. And we said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He guides whom He wills and He misguides whom He wills. And when we say He guides whom He wills and misguides whom He wills, this is upon our previous discussion that there is Allah's fadl and there is Allah's adl. There is Allah's fadl and Allah's adl. When we say that Allah guides someone, it means that Allah gives him some additional support, additional aid, some i'ana, on top of all of the other things He has already given him, meaning of a will, choice, ability to reason, see, think, reflect, ponder, sent him messengers, gave him books. All of these things Allah has bestowed upon a human, and that is justice from Allah. So whomever He wills to guide, because He sees in that person a desire for guidance, He will give some additional i'ana, He will give him tawfiq. And the one whom He knows does not desire guidance or want guidance, He will just leave him. This is from His adl. He will just leave him and not give him any aid or support, but just leave him to whatever He has already given him of the various faculties and guidance through the books and the messengers. And so that person is left to his own devices. So really, when we think of guidance and misguidance, guidance is support and granting success, and misguidance is mere abandonment. Allah leaves a person to his own devices, and in that He has not been unjust. He has not been unjust. So that was the position of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And so we're going to continue now with the rest of the passage from Imam al-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala, and we'll read through this passage and then go through it bit by bit, inshallah. So al-Tahawi says, وَالْخَيْرُ وَالشَّرُّ مُقَدَّرَانِ عَلَى الْعِبَادِ وَالْخَيْرُ وَالشَّرُّ مُقَدَّرَانِ عَلَى الْعِبَادِ. That good and evil are decreed upon a servant. Good and evil are decreed upon a servant. وَالْإِسْتِطَاعَةُ الَّتِي يَجِبُ بِهَا الْفِعْلِ من نحو التوفيق الذي لا يجوز أن يوصف المخلوق به فهي مع الفعل. وأما الاستطاعة من جهة الصحة والوسع والتمكن والسلامة الآلات فهي قبل الفعل وبها يتعلق الخطاب وهو كما قال تعالى لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Now the meaning of this passage, again we're going to come back to this in some more detail. It just basically means that there's a type of ability which a servant has, which is bestowed by Allah, which really means guidance from Allah. Allah is the one who gives the person the ability at the time of when he is supposed to obey Allah and worship Allah and act for Allah. Allah gives him the ability at that point in time, which is basically a type of giving him success, tawfiq from Allah. Right? So this happens at the time of the action itself, where Allah gives the person the tawfiq and the ability. And then there is another type of ability which is present before a person does the action, before a person, decides to obey Allah. And so these are the general things of just ability, having the power, the ability to act, the capacity to act, the capacity to walk to the prayer, for example, the capacity to leave something for the sake of Allah, the physical ability. Every human has that ability prior to him performing any righteous action, right? So in other words, we are speaking here about the abilities. There is an ability which takes place at the time of doing the act. That is something that is with Allah when He bestows tawfiq. And then there is the general ability that is present with everybody before they actually do any action. Right? So everybody has the general ability to think, reflect, to speak, not to speak, to act, not to act, to obey, to disobey, to worship, not to worship. That qudra or that istita'a, that ability is present with every person. And it is because humans have that ability, on the basis of that ability, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing them with commands and with prohibitions and replacing a burden of responsibility upon them. A burden upon them to respond to the Sharia. And so here, At-Tahawi says, وَبِهَا يَتَعَلَّقُ الْخِطَابِ. That it is because of this capacity which is present that the khitab, that the address of the Quran to the servants, that it is dressed on that basis. It is related to that ability. For that reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not burden a person more than its ability. And then He says, وَأَفْعَالُ الْعِبَادِ خَلْقُ اللَّهِ وَكَسْبٌ مِنَ الْعِبَادِ. That the actions of the servants are created by Allah. They are the creations of Allah. All of the actions of the servants, they are creations of Allah. And they are earned by the servants. وَكَسْبٌ مِنَ الْعِبَادِ. Now here he uses the word kasb, which again, it can be given a correct interpretation. And so we will look at that as we go into the more detailed explanation, inshallah ta'ala. Then he continues and says, وَلَمْ يُكَلِّفُهُمُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى إِلَّا مَا يَطِيقُونَ وَلَا يُطِيقُونَ إِلَّا مَا يُطِيقُونَ وَلَا يُطِيقُونَ إِلَّا مَا كَلَّفَهُم. That Allah did not burden them, the Most High, except with what they have the ability for. And they do not have the ability except for what Allah entrusted them with or tasked them with. And this is the explanation of the statement لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. When we say لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله, then this is a statement, is an explanation is of this statement. We say نقول لا حيلة لأحد ولا حركة لأحد ولا تحول لأحد عن معصية الله إلا بمعونة الله ولا قوة لأحد على إقامة طاعة الله والثبات عليها إلا بتوفيق الله. The meaning of that whole sentence basically is that when any person, when he commits a disobedience to Allah, then all of the movements and motions and abilities and thought processes and everything that he went through in order to commit that disobedience, then none of that took place except that it took place through the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning through the power and the ma'una, the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that he wasn't independent in committing that act of disobedience in reality. And likewise, when a person establishes obedience to Allah and is firm upon it, then again, he never had any power in doing all of that except that it was by the tawfiq, by the granting of success by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we say la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, it really means, as we shall explain, that nothing really takes place except by the might and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then it continues, وَكُلُّ شَيْءٍ يَجْرِي بِمَشِيئَةِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَعِلْمِهِ وَقَضَائِهِ وَقَدَرِهِ. Everything proceeds upon the will of Allah, the Most High, His knowledge, His decree, His judgment, and His qadar, His determination. غَلَبَتْ مَشِيئَتُهُ الْمَشِيئَاتِ كُلَّهَا. His will dominates all other wills. وَغَلَبَ قَضَاؤُهُ الْحِيَلَ كُلَّهَا. And His judgment or His determination overwhelms all other things that people might plan and work out. يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ غَيْرُ ظَالِمٍ أَبَدًا. He does whatever He wills, and He is never unjust ever. تَقَدَّسَ عَنْ كُلِّ سُوءٍ وَحَيْنٍ. He is absolved and purified and glorified above every evil. وَتَنَزَّهَ عَنْ كُلِّ عَيْبٍ وَشَيْنٍ. And He is innocent and free from every fault and blemish. لَا يُسْأَلُ عَمَّا يَفْعَلُ وَهُمْ يُسْأَلُونَ. He will not be asked about what He does, but they will be asked about what they do. So this was a lengthy passage that we read. And so there are some issues that can be extracted from these sentences. And so to do that, we're going to refer to some of the commentary from Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan and likewise Sheikh Al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala. And so we'll restrict ourselves to their statements for this lesson. And in the next lesson, inshallah, we'll go through some of the speech of Sheikh Zayd bin Muhammad bin Hadi al-Madkhali rahimahullah. And then after that, we look in more detail at the issues from the speech of Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh. So for today's lesson, from this passage, Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, he says, regarding the verse in the Quran, in this passage in general, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. This ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. Allah does not burden a soul more than what it can bear. And likewise in the same ayah, ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به. O our Lord, do not burden us with that for which we have no ability or capacity. And likewise in another ayah, earlier in Surah Al-Baqarah, يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر. Allah wishes for you ease, He does not wish for you difficulty. Surah Al-Baqarah 2 verse 185. And so from these sentences, from these verses in the Quran, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not burden the servants with more than what they are able. And if He was to do that, if He was to burden a servant more than what the servant is able, this is only from the angle of punishment. From the angle of punishment. And this happened with respect to Bani Israel because of their stubbornness and arrogance and their oppression. And for that reason we read in the Quran, فَبِظُلْمٍ مِّنَ الَّذِينَ هَادُوا حَرَّمْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ طيبات أحلت لهم وبصدهم عن سبيل الله كثيرا وأخذهم الربا. That on account of the oppression of those who were Jews, we prohibited upon them, we made unlawful upon them the good things which had been previously made lawful for them, because of them preventing from the path of Allah often, and due to their taking of riba, due to their taking of usury or interest. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He punished the Bani Israel and He imposed upon them more than what they could bear. And for that reason we see the supplication at the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, in fact those verses are in Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4 verse 160 and 61, regarding the Yahud. And so this is why we see the supplication. The Shaykh says in the dua, رَبَّنَا وَلَا تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْنَا إِسْرًا كَمَا حَمَلْتَهُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِنَا. O Allah, do not impose upon us a burden as you imposed it upon those who came before us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from His bounty, from His fadl, from His ihsan, from His benevolence, is that He will not impose upon the servants more than what they can bear. And this is mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He is Ar-Rahim. Inna Allah bin Nasi, Inna Allah bin Nasi la ra'ufur Rahim. Indeed, Allah is to mankind compassionate and merciful. So from this we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He wanted to, He could impose upon people more than what they could bear. But He doesn't do that out of mercy and compassion for His servants. But there are some instances where, because of the dhulm, the oppression and the arrogance and the so on and so forth of the servants, as a punishment from Him, He may impose upon them more than what they can bear. But as we said, this is just the exceptional case in the case of punishment for a people who deserve that punishment. Now, also from the points that was made in the speech of At-Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala is that he said, وَلَمْ يُكَلِّفُهُمُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى إِلَّا مَا يُطِيقُونَ وَلَا يُطِيقُونَ إِلَّا مَا كَلَّفَهُم. Now in this statement, At-Tahawi says that Allah does not impose upon them except what they are able to bear. And they are not able to bear, they are not able except what He imposes upon them. This statement here is incorrect. Right? To understand why, let's read the commentary from Sheikh Al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, and likewise Sheikh Ibn Baz rahimahullah ta'ala. Sheikh Ibn Baz, he says, this is incorrect because...
What statement?
Huh?
Which statement was that?
وَلَمْ يُكَلِّفُهُمُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى إِلَّا مَا يُطِيقُونَ وَلَا يُطِيقُونَ إِلَّا مَا كَلَّفَهُمْ. That he says that Allah did not burden or impose upon the people except what they are able, and nor are they able to do except what Allah has imposed upon them. Meaning that they are only able to do whatever Allah has imposed upon them. They can't do more. That's what he's implying, yeah? Right, so Allah did not impose upon the people more than what they can bear. And likewise, the people can only do what Allah imposed upon them. Right? So he making these statements to be equivalent. But that's not actually correct. Right? For the reason, the second half of the statement is not correct. For the reason that Shaykh Ibn Baz will explain, he says, هذا غير صحيح بل المكلفون يطيقون أكثر مما كلفهم به. سبحانه ولكنه عز وجل لطف بعباده ويسر عليهم ولم يجعل عليهم في دينهم حرجا فضلا منه وإحسانا والله ولي التوفيق. Which means that this is not correct because the people are in fact able to do more than what Allah has actually imposed upon them. Right? So to say basically that the servants are only able to do whatever Allah has imposed upon them is not correct. Because the servants are actually able to do more than what Allah has imposed upon them. If, the servants, if they wanted to, they could fast for 2 consecutive months. If they wanted to, they could pray 10 prayers in a day. If they wanted to, they could give more than 2.5% of charity, right? So meaning that to say that the servants are only able to do, they only have the ability and the capacity to do only that which Allah imposed upon them is not actually correct. Right? Because the servants actually have a capacity to actually do a lot more. But Allah didn't impose that upon them. So while it is correct to say, obviously that Allah does not impose upon the servants more than what they can bear. This is correct. But on the other hand, it's not correct to say that the servants are only able to do whatever Allah imposed upon them is incorrect. You get it? Yeah, see the difference now, yeah? So he says, this is not correct because the people, the mukallafun, are able to do more than what Allah has imposed upon them. But Allah Azza wa Jal, He was compassionate to His servants. He was benevolent to them, compassionate to His servants. He made easy for them in that He didn't make any hardship upon them in their religion as a bounty and a favor and a benevolence from Himself. And likewise, Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says the same thing. He says, this is not correct because they are able to do more than what Allah has imposed upon them. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He just desires for His servants ease and to make things light for them. As Allah says in the ayah, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرِ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرِ. Allah wishes ease for you. He does not wish hardship upon you. And likewise He said, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُخَفَّفَ عَنْكُمْ. Allah wishes to lighten affairs upon you. This is Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4, verse 28. And likewise in another ayah, the Shaykh quotes another ayah, وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. Allah did not make any hardship in the religion for you or upon you. Surah Al-Hajj, 22nd Surah, verse 78. Now, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually added more in terms of the responsibilities that we have, then we would have the ability to do that. For example, if there were more than 5 prayers, meaning if there was 6 prayers, for example, we would have the ability to do that. But that would create hardship. To impose more would impose hardship. Even though it might impose hardship, it does not mean that we would not have the ability to do that. So from Allah's bounty, as the Shaykh says, تفضل علينا ورحمنا وخفف عنا ولم يجعل علينا في الدين من حرج. So Allah was bountiful upon us, He showed mercy to us, He lightened the affairs upon us, and He did not make any difficulty for us in the religion. Likewise, Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, he says regarding this, that this has an observation, that statement of At-Tahawi, because the people are in fact able to do more than what Allah has imposed upon them. However, Allah wished for them ease, He did not wish for them difficulty, and so Allah raised from them the hardship, and He legislated things in the religion which are basically easy, and He prohibited them from adding from adding things to the religion and moving away from that which is in moderation and in balance. So for example, the Shaykh says, فَلَا يُجُوزُ لِلْإِنسَانِ أَن يُصَلِّي كُلَّ اللَّيْلِ. So for example, it's not permissible for a servant to just pray all night, just to continuously pray all night. Likewise, it is not permissible for him to abandon getting married, to leave marriage. As the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, he said, أَمَّا أَنَا فَأُصَلِّي. As for me, then I pray and I fast and I marry women وَأَتَزَوَّجُ النِّسَاء وَأَصُومُ وَأَفْطِرُ. I fast and I break the fast. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. And whoever aspires away from my sunnah, who desires something away other than my sunnah, then he is not from me. So Allah, the Shaykh says, does not burden more than what, with something that causes hardship upon a person. Allah did not legislate this for a person to pray all night, or to abandon marriage, or to, fast continuously. And if Allah had imposed such things upon them, or imposed more burdens and responsibilities upon them, they would have been able to do it physically, but it would be hardship upon them. So the Shaykh is, وَلَكِنْ لَا يَرْضَى لَهُمُ الْمَشَقَّةِ وَالْعُسْرِ. But Allah is not pleased that He should put upon His servants hardship and difficulty. So then after this we have the statement, the explanation of the statement, لَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. There is no power, no might, no movement, nor might except by Allah. What is the meaning of this statement? Shaykh Al-Fawzan, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, he says, La hawla. What is the meaning of hawla? Meaning, La tahawwal min halin ila hal. This means that there isn't movement from one state to another state, from one condition to another condition, from one being, from form of being or state of being to another form of being. Meaning that all movement that we see, all action that we see, all the transformation and change that we see from one state to another state, all of this does not take place except by Allah. Except by Allah Azza wa Jal and through His aid. And likewise, there is no power. There is no power except the power of Allah Azza wa Jal. Now when a person accepts this and acknowledges this, that in the whole universe there is no hawl, there is no movement, there is no power except by that of Allah, then this means that really he is making taslim, he is freeing from himself any claim of having any, independent power or might or ability or whatever. He's resigning himself to the power and the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the meaning of this is that he never becomes amazed with himself. So this statement, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, is a means of removing amazement from oneself, becoming amazed with oneself, thinking that one has, for example, ability and strength and power and intelligence and so on and so forth, by which a person believes that he is, attaining whatever he is attaining of wealth and riches and whatever else. When he says, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, it is denying from himself this ability and power and, this amazement that a person becomes amazed from himself. Rather, he's returning all affairs back to Allah Azza wa Jal. And so in turn, this also means that we seek aid and assistance from Allah. It makes a person needy and dependent upon Allah, in that it leads him to make isti'ana. إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينَ. You make isti'ana from Allah, you seek aid from Allah. And so therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who aids you upon obedience and who changes you from a state of disobedience to obedience. He's the one who makes that movement upon you. And from kufr to Islam, from disbelief to Islam. So everything is through the hawl of Allah, through the might and the power. Right? It is Allah the one who makes things move in that manner. A servant from disobedience to obedience, from kufr to Islam, from shirk to tawheed, from disbelief to iman, and so on and so forth. Allah is the one. All of this is through the hawl and the quwwah, the might and the power, the movement which is brought about by way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had entrusted you and left you to yourself, then you would not have been able. And if you basically made all efforts, every effort, and you tried to earn or to seek wealth and whatever else, this effort and this tiredness would be from you. This would be from you. But the tawfiq, granting success and putting blessing in that effort of yours, that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So when we say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, then all of these points that are being mentioned by the Shaykh, this is basically the meaning of that statement. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So now, obviously, what is the context of this statement in the speech of At-Tahawi? Then he's simply saying that there is no person who moves to disobedience or who moves to obedience except that it is by the hawl and the quwwah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And everything is by Allah. There is no movement, no power except by way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whether that is in disobedience or whether that is in obedience, whether it's in terms of the actions of the servants, right? The actions of the servants are either obedience or disobedience, right? Whether it's in relation to them or whether it is in relation to any of the other events that take place in the heavens and the earth, of, for example, the movement of the wind, right? The rain, and all of the other phenomena that take place, the movement of the sun, the movement of the moon, the alternation of night and the day, and everything else, all of those physical asbab, the ways and means, nothing is except by the hawl and the quwwah, the power and the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so therefore that has some implications, as we see in the statement of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, that we relinquish any independent power and might. It makes us humble. It makes us realize that we seek aid from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we realize that our own efforts in themselves, although we might strive and tire ourselves, the tawfiq ultimately comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And likewise, Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, he continues to comment that upon the statement of At-Tahawi, that no matter how much we strive in using the ways and the means, the asbab, adopting the ways and the means, because in this creation Allah has decreed asbab, as we mentioned, the ways and the means for everything. There are ways and means of acquiring wealth, ways of means of acquiring sustenance, ways and means of attaining offspring, children. There are ways and means of everything, for everything. And so no matter how much we strive in taking these ways and means, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not decreed the effect, if He has not decreed the end result, then it will not benefit you. For you taking the ways and means, those ways and means will not benefit you. Now, to give an illustration of this, to give an example of this, what this means, a person, for example, might set out on a journey, and in order to save himself and be secure, he takes all of the ways and means to make sure that journey is safe. So for example, he might decide to travel during the day. He might decide to check his vehicle, check the tire pressure on everything. He will check the water, he will check the oil, When he drives, he will basically confine himself to the national speed limits on every road. He will wear the seat belt. He will, keep his eyes on the mirrors and everything, checking the rear, checking the everything. So he will take all of the ways and means and drive safely and carefully. But, even though he's taken every means possible, it could be that from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there could be someone on the other lane, on the other side, from the other direction, falls asleep in a truck, for example, and it just comes over the barrier and smashes into him and he dies. Even though he took every single way and means possible in order to, ensure that he will be safe. This means that no matter how many of the asbab you take, the ways and means, the affairs are still in the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So all of your actions will only benefit you if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed benefit for you. Now this does not mean that you don't take the ways and means. It means that you must take the ways and means, because taking the ways and means are part and parcel of achieving the effect, of reaching the goal. The ways and means are part and parcel of reaching the goal. Now a person shouldn't think, for example, in the example which I gave, that, well, if Allah has decreed for me to be killed in the journey and not be safe, then there's no point in me checking the oil, checking the tires, checking the pressure, driving, keeping to the national speed limit. There's no point in me doing that, because if I'm going to die, I'm going to die anyway. This is the wrong way of thinking. It is faulty thinking. It is stupid thinking. It's just like a person saying, as we've mentioned before, that a person says, well, if Allah has decreed that I'm going to be full and not hungry, then there's no point in me eating. What's the need to eat then in that case, if I'm going to be hungry? If Allah's going to make me not thirsty, what's the point in me drinking water, because I'm going to be thirsty? I'm not going to be thirsty anyway, right? But this is incorrect, because Allah's qadar, Allah's qada, everything in the creation is by way of the decree of Allah, which includes the asbab. So if Allah decreed for you not to be hungry, then it is through way of food that you will not be hungry. If Allah has decreed for you to have children, then it will be through marriage and marital relations that you will have children. Right? This is the asbab, a part and parcel of the creation and the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this means that we must take the ways and means. We must adopt the ways and means, but that does not mean that the ways and means in themselves will always bring about the effects or the goals, because that is in the hand and the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the tawfiq, as the Shaykh says here, what tawfiq ala Allah, the success in all of that is with Allah. You are simply commanded to use the ways and the means. You are commanded to adopt the ways and the means. Now here the ways and the means are both religious and they are worldly. The examples I gave are the worldly examples of how we achieve goals. But likewise, if you want to achieve paradise, you have to take the ways and the means, and that is acting by the Sharia. Acting, by what the messengers brought. So if you perform the asbab, you obey Allah, you establish the pillars, you establish the prayers, you keep away from disobedience, and so on and so forth, you stick to right guidance, then this is all from the asbab that play a part in you entering paradise. Not that they will on their own lead you to paradise. Why? Because we know it is Allah's mercy as well, along with the asbab, that will cause you to enter it is Allah's mercy first and foremost, but also the asbab are a means, but it is Allah's mercy first and foremost by which you enter paradise. So, then we have the statement of Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullahu ta'ala, and he says that, and this is just a general comment now on this passage, he says that which the Quran has indicated is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free of oppressing and wronging his servants, because At-Tahawi said, يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ غَيْرُ ظَالِمٍ أَبَدًا. Allah does whatever He wills, but He is never oppressive. He is never oppressive. So Shaykh Al-Bani says, الَّذِي دَلَّ عَلَيْهِ الْقُرْآنُ مِنْ تَنْزِيهِ اللَّهِ نَفْسِهِ عَنْ ظُلْمِ الْعِبَادِ يَقْتَدِي قَوْلًا وَسَطًا بَيْنَ قَوْلَيْ الْقَدْرِيَّةِ وَالْجَبْرِيَّةِ. So he says basically that which the Quran has indicated of the fact that Allah is never unjust to His servants, that He is free from being unjust to His servants, is something that necessitates that we have a balanced position between the position of the Qadariyah and the Jabariyah. And so therefore, the fact that something oppressive comes from the servants and something repugnant comes from the servants does not mean that this is dhulm on behalf of Allah and something repugnant on behalf of Allah. For example, to illustrate what is meant here, imagine one person murders another person. Imagine one person steals from another person. This now is dhulm. This is dhulm as it relates to the people, and it is something repugnant. But as something created by Allah and decreed by Allah to take place, this is not dhulm as it relates to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Because this is what the Qadariyah say. This is basically the foundation of the doubt of the Qadariyah. How can Allah decree something, murder upon a servant, and stealing upon a servant, and gambling upon a servant, and fornication and adultery upon a servant, and then punish him for it when this is a repugnant action? This would be repugnant for Allah to do this. This would be oppression for Allah to do this. Therefore, Allah does not decree this. Allah does not create this. Rather, the servants do this themselves. Do you understand the reasoning here? Right? So, the answer being that just because an action is evil and repugnant as it relates to men, like murder to us is repugnant and evil, we can't make qiyas now. We can't make an analogy and say, well, because it's repugnant amongst the actions of men, therefore it is also repugnant in the actions of Allah, so therefore Allah cannot have created this action. This is the faulty reasoning of the Qadariyah. This is batil, this is false. Because Allah's actions cannot be likened to the actions of men. We can't make that qiyas. We can't make this tamthil. This is actually a tamthil between Allah and His creation. And it is like a false analogy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Rabb. He is Al-Ghani, free of any need, Al-Qadir, the able. But the servants are the ones who are needy, fuqara and subdued. And so this is the first point the Shaykh mentions. And then he goes on to mention a second important point. And this is that the people who erred in Al-Qadr, those who are basically upon the view of the Ahlul Kalam, they say, what is the meaning of dhulm? The meaning of dhulm is, according to them, something which is impossible for Allah to do. Right? Meaning that dhulm is something that Allah He's not able to do. It is impossible for Allah to commit dhulm. Now, is this correct? Is this correct?
For Allah to do.
Yeah.
Oppress.
Yeah. Is it possible for Allah to oppress His servants or not?
Is it possible for Him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
He can.
Yeah. Because if you say it is impossible for Allah, Allah can, in His actions, Allah can. No, we know that Allah does not be unjust, but the issue here is possibility and impossibility. Do you understand? Yeah. Is They say it is impossible for Allah to be unjust, meaning that Allah cannot be unjust even if He wanted to. You know what I'm saying? In this case, how can it be a praise when Allah says, for example, the many verses in the Quran, when Allah says, وَمَا ظَلَمْنَاهُمْ, we did not oppress them. Or when Allah says, لَا ظُلْمَ الْيَوْمِ, there will be no oppression today, meaning on the Day of Judgment. Right? If Allah negates injustice from Himself, it has to be a praise. Now, if it's impossible for Allah to be unjust in the first place, how can that be a praise?
Yeah.
How can that be a praise? Do you understand?
So it's like they've given Allah like a deficiency.
Yeah. Well, really, it is a type of deficiency, yeah. Because they're removing something praiseworthy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is praised because He's not unjust. Allah is praised because He is not unjust. Right? Now, let me give you an example. Let me give you a crude example from the creation. To get the notion across. Now, imagine there a person who has no arms. A person has no arms. Now, can this person be praised for never stealing or taking something that didn't belong to him? Because he's not really able to do that, is he? He's not able to steal. He's not able to do with his hands what other people are able to do. So can we therefore now praise this person and say, mashallah, this person, he's never ever taken something with his hands which doesn't belong to him? This wouldn't be a praise for that person. It wouldn't be a praise for that person. So therefore, to say about Allah that it is impossible for him to commit dhulm, this is incorrect. Rather, if Allah wanted to, He could be oppressive to His servants. But because He is just and because He is not oppressive, He chooses not to. All right? And so here, Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, he mentions some of the verses in the Quran indicating this. وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَلَا يَخَافُ ظُلْمًا وَلَا حَضْمًا. Whoever works righteous deeds and is a believer, he does not need to fear any oppression. He will no need to fear any oppression or injustice, meaning that you will receive justice for your deeds. Likewise, ما يبدل القول لدي وما أنا بظلام للعبيد. The word will not be altered with me. I am not one who is oppressive to His servants. Likewise, statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَمَا ظَلَمْنَاهُمْ وَلَكِنْ كَانُوا هُمُ الظَّالِمِينَ. We did not oppress them, but they are the ones who are the oppressors. And likewise, the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَوَجَدُوا مَا عَمِلُوا حَادِرًا وَلَا يَظْلِمُ رَبُّكَ أَحَدًا. Everything they did, meaning all the actions they committed, they will find them present with them, in front of them. And your Lord does not oppress or wrong anybody. And likewise, the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, الْيَوْمَ تُجْزَى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ لَا ظُلْمَ الْيَوْمِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ سَرِيعُ الْحِسَابِ. This day will every soul be recompensed with what it did. There is no oppression today. Indeed, Allah is swift in reckoning. So, all of these verses invalidate this claim that it is impossible for Allah to be unjust. Rather, if Allah wanted to, He could be just. But because of His justice, His adl, and His, He chooses not to be just. And likewise, the Shaykh also mentions the hadith, Qudsi, Ya ibadi, inni haramtu dhulm ala nafsi. O my servants, I have prohibited oppression upon myself, and I made it unlawful amongst you. So do not oppress yourselves. The Shaykh says this indicates two things. Number one, that he prohibited dhulm upon himself. Something which is impossible, then you can't make it unlawful upon yourself. Do you understand? If it was impossible, how can you make it, in the first place, how can you make it unlawful upon yourself? Yeah? A person can't say, for example, I'm going to make it impossible upon myself. I'm going to make it unlawful upon myself, to fly. Well, you can't fly in the first place, so you can't make it impossible upon yourself. A person can't say, I'm going to make it impossible upon myself. I'm going to make it unlawful upon myself, sorry. I'm going to make it unlawful for myself to not take any water for 2 weeks. Well, you can't do that because you'll die. You can't make that impossible. You can't make that unlawful upon you. You can't make impossible things unlawful upon yourself. Right, so this is the angle of evidence that the Shaykh is bringing from this hadith. That this hadith shows that dhulm is, if Allah wanted to, he could commit dhulm. But he's made it unlawful upon himself. And secondly, he informed in this hadith Qudsi that he made dhulm unlawful upon himself, just in the same way that he made mercy, he prescribed it upon himself. Right? So he prescribed mercy upon himself, and he made oppression unlawful upon himself. Right? So this refutes their argument of saying that oppression is impossible upon Allah, because here Allah is likewise prescribing, making something, mercy, he's prescribing it upon himself. And so they say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so it is said to these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who wrote and prescribed mercy upon himself, and he's the one who made unlawful oppression upon himself. And this is only because he is able. He's able to show mercy, which is why he prescribed it upon himself. He's able to commit oppression, which is why he made it unlawful upon himself. Right? So the same thing in both of those examples. He prescribed mercy because he's able to show mercy. So in other words, to argue and to say that it is impossible for Allah to commit oppression, then the meaning of this hadith would be that, well, Allah's made unlawful something which is impossible for him to do anyway. Right? So the same meaning would apply to this hadith. The same argument would have to apply to this hadith. That Allah has ordered himself with something which is impossible. Do you get it, yeah? Whereas we know that Allah is able to show mercy. Right? So the argument is false. The deduction is false. And finally, the statement of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he does whatever he wills of good. He decrees whatever he wills. Allah decrees whatever he wills of good and evil, and of reward and punishment. But he's never unjust. In all of this, he is never unjust to his servants, because he puts everything in its proper place. He puts reward, favor, success in its proper place for the one who deserves that. He makes success unlawful for the person who does not deserve that. Everything is in its proper place. He's never a zalim, he never oppresses anybody, so he never punishes the one who is obedient and righteous, nor does he reward the one who is disobedient. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfect in his essence, in his names and attributes, and in his actions, in everything, and in his creation, in all of that, he is just and perfect in all of that. And finally, the Shaykh says, that Allah cannot be asked about what he does, because there's no imperfection in Allah's actions. Everything he does is hikmah, is wisdom. Everything falls in its proper place. Everything is in its proper place. But as for the servants, they are the ones who will be asked. Why? Because in the actions there is errors. There are errors. There are mistakes. There are things which are put in other than their proper places. So there is a difference between Allah and his actions and the actions of the servants. Allah will not be asked about his actions, but they will be asked about their actions. Allah's actions are wise, perfect, in their proper places. But the actions of the servants are not like that. And so in the actions of the servants, there are mistakes, errors, there is injustice, there is oppression, there is envy, arrogance, and so on and so forth. And all those things come into the servants of the actions. But Allah's actions are unlike that. Allah's actions are wisdom and perfect. So he will not be asked, but their actions, they will be asked about their actions. So this is the end of this commentary on this passage of Imam al-Tahawi, rahimahullah ta'ala. We're going to stay with this passage yet still, in the next lesson with commentary from Sheikh Zayd al-Madkhali, which again will round up the many issues that we've discussed already, and that will then lead us inshallah ta'ala to a more detailed discussion in the speech of Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh. And with that we conclude our lesson there today. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.